guys. Wow. It's sunny out there, there's music, there's all sorts. It's always so humbling at a festival when people with so many things they could be doing choose to come along and listen to a speaker. And so, thank you. I really hope I make it worth your while. I definitely have some stuff to say. I really hope I get it out in the right order. It's kind of jumbled in my head sometimes. Now, speaking like this doesn't come naturally to me, but there's definitely things that I really feel I'd like to share. So welcome, and let's get started. When Tay got in touch with me a few months ago and said, "Love you to come," he asked me what I'd like to talk about. And it was so either insane or inspired. I thought I'd read it out. Because this is what I'm supposed to be talking about. I put human oblique stroke nature. What is it to be human in the 21st century? What is our innate nature? And what can be learned from our collective past that might be beneficial to reintegrate today? So that's what I set myself as a task, and I'm like absolutely overwhelmed. Who the hell am I to talk about human nature? I mean, for God's sake, that's a bit much. Actually, I wrote some notes out sitting under a tree earlier today, and I've got next to it, who am I? Not 100% sure. What I think I meant by that was, who am I to answer this question? And I'm not 100% sure I can, but certainly I have some insights that are unique and special and precious, and things I'd love to share. And for those of you who don't know my work at all, well, firstly, my name is Bruce Parry, and I had the great privilege of travelling the world, paid for by anyone who pays his license fee, which is one or two of you probably, to go around the world and do a whole bunch of stuff. And I kind of had the dream gig. Don't ask me how I got it, more luck than anything else, but I certainly made the most of it. And there's a number of things I did during my time in television, but the three that were most impactful for me was I made a series called Tribe, where I literally travelled the world and lived with Indigenous peoples, moving into their homes and trying to live for a short period of time, 5 or 6 weeks, as one of them. And as you can imagine, the insights one gets from trying to look at the world through someone else's eyes, and then the deeper insights that you get about reflecting on your own life that come from that. And we'll come on to that in a bit, because that's the big part of this talk, is what I did learn. What can we reintegrate? That's part of my stated aim. And then I did 2 other series, one called Amazon and one called Arctic, and they were different, and basically, ultimately, the Amazon was a look at globalisation, and the Arctic was a look at climate change. And in the Amazon, I did an 8-month trip, starting at the source, going to visit all sorts of places that were indicative of what's happening in the Amazon today. And it's still even much more so happening right as we speak. So things like the cocaine industry, the gold mining, the illegal gold mines, soya, logging, the cattle ranchers, slavery, the tribal people's issues, and all the rest of it. And during that journey, trying to make the point that here's a bunch of loggers that I'm hanging out with chopping the forest down. We all sit at home going, aren't they bad chopping the forest down? But actually, you see these guys and they're dirt poor, just trying to scratch a living, and trying to sort of implant in an audience that they're obviously not the problem. Where is the problem? You know, the people who are in the trade, buying the stuff, us, you know, basically. But we didn't make that point directly. And I still get people coming up, isn't it bad? But like, you know, that was the point of that. It was like trying to bridge the gap between what's happening in the rest of the world and the way that we live our lives. And then the trip around the Arctic was a similar one. Again, it was kind of BBC Two entertainment, but really the subtext was about climate change. And this one was whereby I'd go and visit groups of people who were all struggling in some way with their life changing as a result of climate change. And so the sea ice thinning, people couldn't hunt the walrus anymore. The glaciers retreating, so that all the miners are coming in and finding gold and stuff, and then going to places like Svalbard and seeing meeting some of the top scientists in the world from all over the world, who are married to their science, out studying glaciers and air particles and all the rest of it. There's like state-of-the-art, the richest sort of scientific laboratories in the world, where you could smell if someone was, or sense if someone was smoking a cigarette 3 miles away while they were testing the air, and in getting an insight into what was really happening. That climate change is real. Climate change is very much affected by human interaction and our activities. And then coming back to a nation that was still in debate about it, you know, because at the time the BBC was still doing Right to Reply, bringing out someone to give the alternative voice, which of course makes sense and should happen. But when it comes to things like this, no, come on, you know. So that was the last thing I did with the BBC, and I was frustrated by it. I felt it was too little too late, and so I left to go and make my own film called Tawai, where I tried to make a film that was bringing to an audience some of the deeper stuff that I'd learned, some of the more philosophic, spiritual aspects that were really vital, I thought, for us all to start connecting with if we were going to try and make these transitions. And that ended up being a 10-year journey, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So in a sense, what I had was this extraordinary life journey where I saw the problems firsthand, and they were very real to me, even though like my parents would debate it and deny it and stuff. For me, it was like, there's no question, this is happening, it's happening now, it's happening fast, and we're very much a part of it. Shit, we got to change. You know, so that was like in me. And not only that, because I'm sure many people had that same feeling, but I had the sort of personal, I know the person whose life is being affected by this. I know, I've met them, I've lived in their house, they're struggling. I know that I'm connected to that with the way I live my life. And so that became something that sort of lived inside me, and for then the next 10 years or so has been this journey of how can we turn this ship around? How can we make our way through, you know? Is it possible? And so, of course, alongside seeing all the problems, I had this amazing insights, having lived with all these indigenous peoples, like, shit, here's all sorts of insights into other ways of being, other ways of coexisting and relating to each other in the environment that is what we've all had in our past, and maybe there's some stuff we could bring back in to where we are now. And that's what I'm going to try and talk about in this chat now, after a sip of beer. So, you know, you go to any healing centre, any festival, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is already kind of in the public consciousness. We know about community, we know about healing rituals, we know about so many things, and they've been coming in more and more and more, and the wisdom of the East, the wisdom of the indigenous peoples. There's a lot that's already coming into our world, and my God, we need it. It's so powerful. So I'm going to talk about some of those things, but then there's also one other deep insight that I had that I don't think is so well known, and that is something that is sort of like preoccupying me a lot at the moment. And maybe in the Q&A we can go into this a little bit, because there's some stuff that I'm really keen on sharing that is hard to imagine how we could bring that back in, but I genuinely feel it's vital. So we'll get there. But just to list some of the amazing wisdom from the tribal peoples, like just a sense of belonging, knowing who you are because you're of a place, of a people. You know, we're so lost, and I feel so often, you know what it's like when you drive into the middle of nowhere and you come across some country bumpkin, they're so rude and they know who they are, because they'll give you shit, they don't give a fuck because they're just so solid in where they're at. Well, imagine that on a daily basis. You just don't, you just know who you are, and it's something that we're missing, and very often we fill that void with all sorts of other stuff. And this filling of the void is a big part of, I think, why we're on this mad trip, because we're on this conveyor belts, these gerbil wheels, trying to find the answer to filling these voids, these addictive tendencies. You don't find addictive tendencies in the same way in so many of these tribal groups. You just don't. You know, a lot of our mental health issues are just not there. And so many of these things I do feel are a symptom of our separation and our segregation and our journey into individuality and individualism. It's like these have brought like great blessings, and they give us great joy and what we perceive as freedoms, but they're actually also killing us at the same time. It feels to me like we've been so successful at creating the type of societies that we want, but we're only just waking up to the fact that it's also killing us and making us sick at the same time. We're like in the sweetie shop, gorging ourselves and going, fuck, this shit isn't good for us. Excuse my language. But, you know, it kind of feels like that's what's happening. And so there's definitely numbers of people who are waking up to that, but there's a lot of people who aren't. And the narratives that are being told, they're peddled out, no surprise, by the advertisers, by the ministers, by the corporations, are, you know, more is good, more fame, more riches, more stuff, more freedom, all of these things. This is the narratives of our time, but they're actually, almost every one of them, almost 180 degrees going in the wrong direction. And when you live with an indigenous group, you realize they don't have those narratives at all. It's much more about collectivism. And so somewhere we've got to figure out how we're going to shift these narratives. And that's not to say that this journey we've been on hasn't brought great blessings. Of course it has. You know, that we are all the richer for so much, but it's also causing us so much damage. And there's sort of like this locomotive that's out of control heading towards the broken bridge or the cliff or whatever. You know, it's going to be really hard to slow down, but that's the job we have. And I think the narratives are at the heart of it, and the narratives are all the wrong way around. Connection is the key word there, I think. We're so disconnected, and those indigenous people are so connected to themselves and to nature, to their community. They know who they are, they have a sense of belonging, they're connected. And we come to a festival like this and it's like, oh my God, how lovely is it to just hang out, you know? It's just to be with each other in nature and to enjoy family time and laughing with friends and all these sorts of things. You know, this could be a daily occurrence if we had more community-like lives. And that's not to dismiss that as a romantic illusion. We know that community's tough. We know that coming back together will be tough, but it is the journey we have to go on. We've like separated ourselves out because we then don't have to deal with our stuff. Don't have someone telling us that you're being a dick. But actually we need that, because otherwise we end up just in our isolated silos and no one gets to heal, and we just carry on filling the void, carry on filling the void. So coming back together at these sorts of moments is vital, and we need to do it more and more. It is about connection, I think. And then the healing tools, the healing they have as well in the tribal groups is so manifold, as nearly every spiritual tradition has at its heart some form of healing, whether it's meditation or yoga or ayahuasca or iboga or drumming or chanting or whatever. All of these are tools that humans have created over time to bring about a sense of reconnection. And often these are used to reconnect to spirit. But they also have a sense of connection as well. Anyone who's been in a drumming circle would know that all of these things, or singing in a choir, they do something to us. They aliven us and awaken us in some way. And when you get into the really hardcore ones, like taking plant medicines, you also have an opportunity to release so much of the trauma that we're all carrying. And again, when you come to the indigenous groups, so many of them don't have the same levels of trauma. I remember when I did iboga and stuff and went through this horrendous journey of looking at my own dark soul and revisiting old girlfriends who are dying and having like just and then sort of telling them all these stories to the dudes, and he was like, yeah, it's apparently some Westerns have some stuff to deal with, but what are the shapes you're seeing? I'm like, what fucking shapes, you know? It's like, what about, you know, so, you know, they don't have very often the same level of trauma. And I tell you why I think that might be is because, again, when you're living in community, especially when there's fewer walls, kids don't want to be with their parents all day. You know, the family unit's a bit of a mess. And like, when you see kids in a tribal setting, they're all just playing with each other. And like you see, hanging with the parents. So I think that's one of mine, you know, running around with all the others out in nature. that's what they want to do. And if mum and dad have a hard time, we all know kids are sponges, and they just receive all the stress. It doesn't matter if I say, oh no, dad's fine, but deep down I'm like angry or upset. They know it, they feel it, they absorb it. And in a tribal setting, very often they'll just go next door. So mum and dad are having a bit of, I'll just go next door. And over time, those traumas that we're all carrying, that we spend so much money bloody on couches or drinking ayahuasca or whatever it is to deal with. Sorry, the healers will, hopefully we'll get rid of the healers one day because you won't need them. But, you know, they just don't have it to the same degree, and I'm not trying to romanticize. They do have problems, and yet there are still many things that we can learn about, and I think the healing is a huge part of it, and we need that so much. And one of the reasons that we're unwilling to slow down and stop, and you see this so much, we've all got friends who are like this, is like just the mere thought of stopping and being with whatever it is that might come up is so painful for some people that they will do anything other than be with that. And I think for anyone who is already on a sort of healing spiritual journey, we have to have compassion for those who haven't gone there yet, because like who would want to live that life? It must be so tough to not even be able to be with yourself and to be constantly charging forwards. And the addictions in our society, of course, are not just to substances and stuff, but it's like to power, to greed. They're the real problems of where we're at, and they're the ones that we kind of weirdly laud, but are actually causing the most problems. But they're still just addictions. They're still coming from a traumatized place, I believe. And so if we are going to make our way through together, we have to have compassion for that. And the end result is, rather than separating and hating, is to bring back into the fold all. Because otherwise we're just going to go back into the same madness. It has to be a universal solution, I feel. And we have to just have some compassion, even for people who feel like they're the worst perpetrators. And then the other thing that if anyone's seen the film I made, To Why, you'll notice is that there's something going on in our brains as well, I think. It's like we've lost a sense of empathy. We seem to be operating in a place where either we there's more and more moves towards less and less empathy. That's a terrible sentence. I think you know what I meant. Whereas that we sort of stretch it out to just a few people or just friends and family, but like, you know, if you're living in a space where you're truly genuinely feeling deep down all of your body and all of your senses, then that sense of empathy can stretch out to all beings and also the nature and the environment that holds us. And to see a tree as something that you have empathy for means that you will think twice before you chop that tree down, you know. And if anyone did see the film, you'll see that I go and visit a group in the Amazon who genuinely are talking to some entity that they call Cobra Gay, who tells them don't take the big trees down, and the big trees are talking to him saying, please don't chop us down, we're like you, we're like, you know, we hurt too, don't burn. It's like, that's the sort of dialogue they've got going on, and it's not for me to tell you where that's coming from, but that's at the heart of how they are interacting with the natural world. Ironically, I think through missionaries, they're now shifting and are beginning to chop the trees down and stuff. And in some ways, that might be at the heart of the biggest pain that we're all carrying, is this shift that we had between hunter-gatherers and then beginning to manipulate nature, which is essentially the start of agriculture. And this is a moment that I touch on in the film, but I really want to go into now. Not that I think we should turn back the clock and all be hunter-gatherers again, but there's something that I learned on my journey that is that is so profound. I think I really want to share it after a beer. Okay, so when I did my tribe shows, for anyone who's seen them, I kind of went everywhere. So I went to the middle of New Guinea with people who don't even have stone tools, to the high Arctic with reindeer herders, to Inuits, to the jungles, to the deserts, you name it, I went everywhere. And I kind of thought I'd seen it all. I was like looking at all of these, arrogantly, I was looking at all these things I just listed, all of these wonderful tools and techniques that we have for reharmonizing and reconnecting. But then deep down, I was looking at these groups and thinking, you know what? I think that there's a deep level of problem here within the species itself. There are so many problems, even though they have these amazing tools, and even though these people are so much less of a problem to the environment and to the world than we are, it feels like they're just further back on a conveyor belt that's just going to bring them to where we are. It's like they're still dealing with all sorts of problems around power and hierarchy and stress and trauma as well. I mean, like, they have tools, but I did at the end of my travels come away going, fuck, maybe we're just a really messed up species and that we can't help ourselves. And then the last group that I visited, I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. It's like, this is like a completely different paradigm. And then I realized through the course of speaking to anthropologists and learning more about it, was that every group that I'd seen, no matter how remote and how ancient and sort of ancestral and like they've been there forever, they might look, they were all actually modern compared to this group, who are holding on to something that perhaps we all had for 95% of our time on the planet before agriculture. And then I realized, and have since visited, a number of other groups who are still basically living only in Africa and Southeast Asia, who are holding on to our way of life that we all once held before the transition into the Neolithic Revolution, the agriculture and domestication of plants and animals for food. And what they're holding is a completely different social order. And I realized that this was the secret. This is the thing that I need to share in the world. No one's talking about this. This is absolutely bonkers. And I think it was so subtle, but so real to me. If I hadn't visited all of those other groups beforehand, and I'd just gone to visit them first, I wouldn't have noticed. It was just like, yeah, here's a sweet group of people, lovely group of people. But like, the fact that I'd visited all these other tribes, and then I came to this lot, is like, this is another operating system. This is just completely like everyone else I've ever met in my life, every nation I've ever been to, every tribe I've ever visited on one side, and then here is a group of people operating in a different way. And I remember arguing with my directors and stuff, and they're saying, oh, this is just an anomaly, and then realizing, no. Every group who still exists in the tropical belts of Africa and Southeast Asia that haven't been affected by the outside, by the Neolithic Revolution, all carrying these similar traits. And essentially what those traits are is they don't have hierarchy, competition. They don't have chiefs and shamans. Every other group I visited had a shaman. They wouldn't have one guy to stand there and start spouting shit. It's like, no. No one is more special, more important, more valued than anyone else. And then you start realizing, wow, okay, this is our true ancestry. And if you think that agriculture's only been around 10, 12,000 years, and we've been around 200,000, 95% of our time on the planet, we existed in this way. And I know that some anthropologists will deny this, and this is still being debated in some universities and stuff, but the anthropologists that I've spoken to, heads of department at UCL, especially Jerome and Ingrid Lewis and Chris Knight and Camilla Power, who are at the forefront of this, are holding this, and I believe this to be the case. And it basically interrupts so much of what we think we're capable of as a species. It's like, fuck, they have tools and methodologies whereby they are able to harmonize the group, whereby no one gets too up, no one gets too down, they just maintain this balance. And I remember saying to them, sure guys, yeah, but this is just this one little group that I'm visiting, they must be in competition with the people across the way. I mean, that's obvious. And he goes, Bruce, you haven't got it, have you? He goes, look, these are nomadic hunter-gatherers. You come back in 6 months, not only will they not be here, they'll be over there, and secondly, half of the ones will have gone somewhere else, and another group will, this is an overlapping way of being that predates even tribalism, that spreads out through the whole of the forest and is still 200,000 people today, and once upon a time was everyone. Okay, that's different. That's interesting. So what it is they have an understanding that any time power gets centralized or fixed, that it causes problems. Now we know that inherently. We all walk around with the most sensitive beings to value and power and stuff. We can see it instantly when people are looking down and looking up, and it's like we're so sensitive to it. But we kind of accept it as just part of our daily lives. But they're all individually working on maintaining that. So if anyone steps out, they bring them down. If anyone's getting depressed, they bring them up. And they're all, each individual, working collectively in this space. And like, so you say, okay, Bruce, that's a great dream. That's mad. How's that going to come back? And maybe we'll get to that. But I just want to paint the picture a little bit first, that this is how humans can be. So this is part of my, what is our innate nature question. I'm answering the questions, aren't I? It's like, I would have looked around, having visited all those groups, and gone, yeah, well, actually, we're naturally competitive and aggressive. And that's when you listen to, people with millions of followers like Jordan Peterson, who's doing his podcast. It's like, well, competition's a part of us. We come from lobsters all the way through. We're all competitive. That's just the way it is. It's like, whoa, slow down. Come and visit these people with me and see that, yes, I might have competition inside me. It may be within me, but we're also the most adaptable, pliable, malleable species that's ever been, with a prefrontal cortex which is unique to our species, or nearly, where we can choose how to behave. And it doesn't mean to say that these people don't have competition within their hearts. It just means that they've got systems and tools and narratives within their society that they've all bought into that eliminate it. There's a tribe in Asia that has no violence at all, and they see any form of violence as a type of mental illness. It's so rare. And we just go, no, we've always got that. Oh, it's just an axis of evil. He's just a bad person. Lock him up. It's like, fuck that. That's not the case. We're all the most amazing beings when we're born. And like, yeah, of course there's differences within us genetically, but we have the capacity, like these indigenous groups can show us, especially these egalitarian groups can show us, of living in a really harmonious way. We are amazing. And so what I spent the last whatever years doing is trying to figure out what it is that they do that is the tools, because of course there's so many tools for maintaining this balance, because of course there's so many advantages they have. Firstly, they're born into it. Secondly, they live in the abundant tropics where everyone has equal access to resources. I mean, one of the biggest differences between the bonobos and the chimps is that when the Congo's split, the two plates on either side and the chimps on either side, I mean, I say this like I know it's true. This is another thing that's debated, but like my understanding is they basically split off a long time ago, and basically the chimps are all fighting each other and committing all sorts of problems. Their food sources are very centralized, whereas on the other side, because of a different plate, different soils and all the rest of it, the food sources are all much more spread out, which is why no one can like hold on and fight, and so that's why they're all shagging each other and having a whale of a time. Because there's no real way of controlling it. So the people who are growing up in these egalitarian groups, yes, they have the advantage of living in the tropics. Yes, they have the advantage of being born into these groups. But surely there's something that we can learn from them that we can bring into today, I think. That's the question I've been asking. And what you notice is there's a number of them. Firstly, they got the narrative. Well, the narrative is an easy one, not an easy one, an interesting one, because it comes from, I went to go and visit this group called the Benjeli, who were in the Congo with Jerome and Ingrid Lewis. And if you go on to my website, tawai.earth, and press next, you can see, it's not in the film I made, but it's in an outtake, you can see some of what I'm about to talk about being played out. Is kind of curious. So that did have power and hierarchy, alpha males fighting all the other guys. And what the Benjeli have is they have a ritual that is a reminder of a narrative, so as to keep that story strong for all the new generations coming through. And what Jerome thinks, and I've been there and I've witnessed it and I've been a part of it, and I think he might be onto something, because it's really interesting, and have a look for yourself, is that they have a ritual that they say is the origins of society, the origins of humankind. This is how they describe it. They say this is how we came into being. And when you actually think about the people in the Congo, they are actually just about the most unbroken, oldest lineage of peoples on the planet, them and the San Bushmen, but they've been much more affected by the outside world. And so here in the heart of the Congo, you've got what might well be their creation myth and their original narrative of how we came about. And that might well be one of the oldest stories on the planet. So here's this thing called a Jengi, and what it is essentially is a ritual that is almost a reenactment of this male spirit that looks like the alpha male coming out of the forest, this like very pulsating phallic type thing, and the other guys basically keeping it away from the women. And they say, or Jerome thinks, this is perhaps a reenactment of the time that the women came together and said no to the alpha male, to invite the other guys to come and live with us, provided that they leave at the door or the tree their aggressive and competitive tendencies. And that might well have been the beginnings of how we came about. I've no idea if that's the case or not, but it's a pretty cool story, and certainly this group has a very powerful, they're just incredibly powerful as a group. And what you also, leading on from that, is what you notice is just how powerful the women are. And I think this is quite possibly the most vital insight that I've received from my time with egalitarian tribes. And I apologize for anyone who watches the film Tawai, because you don't hear a lot from the women in Tawai. But watch the Benjilia and you'll hear a lot more. But what you see when you, or experience when you're with an egalitarian tribe, is the women holding on to their own quality of power. They are so powerful in their own right. They're not trying to be like the guys in order to get the good jobs. They don't need to enter into that competitive, aggressive workspace or whatever it is in order to become powerful, because they hold immense power in their own right with their own quality. And their quality of power, which is amazing, and watch the clip, is that basically the old women and the young all together come together and basically hold the guys to account in the public space, teasing them for being bad lovers or lazy lovers, let's say, not bad, that would be unfair. For anyone who's been aggressive, for anyone who's been just disharmonious within the group, and they're mimicking and taking the mick out of the guys in a really powerful way, but rather than that being like full of hatred and toxic masculinity and like you're bad, it's like it's full of love, but it's strong. So it's like, we're going to laugh at you until you start laughing at yourself, and then you're back in. It's not we're going to laugh at you so that you go away, it's we're going to laugh at you so that we can laugh with you. And I promise you, the guys are terrified. And wouldn't you be? They're absolutely terrified. And they're like joking about it. It's like, yeah, the girls love us. But then they're like, ah. I mean, it's just, it's strong. And what's happening also beneath that is this unspoken, but seemingly, and maybe I'm stepping beyond the mark here, but it strikes me that unspoken but seemingly threat of sex strike. Because it's all the women, it's the collective, they're all together. You mess with us, you're not getting any, And that might have been, there's a guy called Chris Knight and Camilla Powell who's written a book about this transition in time, and he suggests that we actually evolved in order to go through this ritual, this moment in time, whereby, as women of our species, we stood upright as a species, hip narrow, we have to give birth to our offspring much younger, so that they're almost helpless when they come out, and And so perhaps they needed a hand, which is why they did invite the guys in. It's like that's quite possibly what went on in order for them to try and have the other guys in. But if you try and stand up and say no to the alpha male one at a time, you'll just get overpowered. But if you come into ostracis at the same time, if you synchronize, and if you don't show when it is that you're in season, both of which are unique to humans, well, not unique, but like rare within the animal kingdom, those two things, which could have evolved within us, might have been there to enable us to collectively come together and say no. And that could be the first time, and maybe only time, in our history that we've truly dismantled aggressive apex male power and brought about equality. Because you think of all the other revolutions that have happened in living memory, they've all just been like eking about a little bit of power, a little bit of, oh, can we have a bit of this back, please? Can we, do you mind if we just like have a few rights here and a few rights there? It's like, never has there been a true revolution that's actually led to equality. And you know, the Bolsheviks might have wanted to, but they just replace like with like. If you come in aggressively, you just end up becoming similar to the guys that you took over from. And here is an indication of another way of having a revolution that I find is another thing that we need to take note of now. It's like, they didn't try and tackle the alpha male head on. They knew that if they did that, they would get hammered, you know. It's like, don't try and tackle the power using the same quality of power that he's exerting, because you won't win. So what they learned was, they learned to retreat and say no. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about at this moment when we're wondering how to deal with this runaway power that's just like so crazy. How do we tackle that, you know? And I see so many of our marches and so many of our demonstrations, and there's a lot of anger in there, and there's a lot of like aggression in there. And actually, I'm really interested in what those women could teach us about stepping away. It's an insight that Einstein and Buckminster Fuller had. Buckminster Fuller with that lovely quote, which I always get wrong, but along the lines of, you know, don't try and defeat the existing power by, what does he say? You know, basically, he says, like, you know, create something else that renders that obsolete. And I think that there's a key there for us. There's a key there for us. And I know that's very hard today, because like in order to create something else, you have to have land and a whole bunch of stuff, and like that's a privilege in its own right. But there's something about it. It's like they're powerful because we give them power. We buy their stuff, we vote them in. And yet, okay, it's all wrapped up in stuff that's very hard to untangle, and it feels really we all feel so disempowered. But the collectivization, the coming together, is really interesting and vital. And I think that those women in the egalitarian societies have something really, really, really important to share with us. How am I doing for time? So what is our innate nature then? I'm riffing now. Well, I think that we are capable of the most extraordinary things. I think that we're wounded and healed, and I think that we're traumatized, and it's going to be really difficult to turn this ship around, you know. And it's very tempting to just go to the bar. But I do believe it's possible, because what I feel deep down is that actually the opportunity, it's like what Charles Eisenstein calls, you know, the more beautiful world that our heart knows is possible. There is something incredibly sweet available to us. But we're so caught up in these narratives that are telling us more fame, more money, more goods, more riches, whatever it is the answer. And of course, well, not of course, when you don't have those things at all, they feel like they're missing, and if only I had that, I'd be happy. I think that's fair for many people. But I also think that we shouldn't forget that we are also part of the elite. You know, it's so easy to always be focused on being a victim for those who are more powerful than us. But if you think about it globally, which we have to, we'll remember that actually we are also part of the problem. As well as being victims in our own right, we're also part of the problem. And when we remember that, then there's a different quality of activism that comes about. It's not like it's like, how can we? It's like I am also part of this. I drive to the demonstration about oil using, you know, it's like, and I see so often that what that anger is on the streets is often just a projection of my own shadow that I haven't actually come to terms with yet, to living in harmony. But I'm aware of it, but I haven't done it yet, and there's an anger inside me, and then I'm just throwing that out at the supposed oppressor. And so I think that when we realize that there's a spectrum and we're all on it somewhere, and when you think that we are an empire, we're still stealing from the rest of the world. I mean, it's like we are. It's unbelievable how rich we are. And we're not rich because we're great. We're rich because we're thuggish. And you know, there is a competition for resources going on, and there always has been. And that has come about since the agricultural revolution, since we started demarcating land, since we started hoarding, all of these things. And that's been going on and continues to go on. So like, yeah, we need to turn this ship around, but we have to do it in a way that is also humble and seeing ourselves as part of the problem. And I don't know how that looks exactly. I think it is about returning to the land. I think it is about coming back into communion with each other. Things can be incredibly enjoyable when they're done together. And when we find meaning, anyone who's read the book by Viktor Frankl, who was the psychiatrist who was in Auschwitz, let's be honest, there's not many places that have been worse in recent history than Auschwitz. So here was this psychologist, and he wrote this book when he came out. He was a prisoner, and his book, he made a couple of points, but the one that I want to bring now is like he noted that anyone whose meaning in life was their own well-being and their own happiness clearly was going to struggle in a place like that, because like you're just not going to have any good times, and so you're just going to be in hell. But anyone whose meaning was something beyond themselves, their children, God, whatever it was, something that's not about them, it's about something else, they could go through all the most difficult times, but they could find joy in their hearts still, because their meaning came from something else. And I think this is a vital point as well that we can learn from our tribal cousins. It's like the last words of my film Tawai come from this guy Arau from the Panan people, and he says, I don't know about planes or cars, but if it doesn't last forever, I don't want it. Unlike the forest, which lasts till the end of time. And the reason I say that is because it's not that he doesn't think planes and cars are cool. Of course they are, but like he just has something else that's more important. And that thing that's more important is the future generations and his kids. And it's like, and we all say that we obviously care and love for our kids, but we're not acting in that way. We're acting in a way that's very about us. And so to shift that meaning collectively, it's very hard to do on your own, but to come together and like make commitments to like really live with a different meaning in our hearts, then we can go through all sorts of complexities and difficulties, as those people have shown us, in order to get to the other side. So I think finding meaning in the future generations and the environment that holds us is a vital, and holding ourselves lovingly to account and each other to account as a group is also, could be a really good way of going around it. But not to beat ourselves up. It's like, you know, we didn't create this. We've inherited it. And like, It's okay. We're not going to make those shifts overnight, but we can start, and we can make the intention to get out of the bar and maybe go to the bridge and try and turn the ship around, because that's what's needed if we want to find this amazing place. And I just think that we can do it, you know, but it does need a coming together. And so I guess I'll finish with just a reiteration of the biggest thing that I noticed with the Indigenous group, the Benjeli in particular, was the power of the women. It was like, okay, here's what it's like where everyone is empowered individually, where everyone is operating from this other way. And that these women were vital to every aspect of maintaining balance. It was like a play between the men and the women. And I know this is a complex subject today, but I'm offering it in its purity of just what I saw. But it was the women having the knowledge and the wisdom that because they were so powerful when they were there teasing the guys, but they knew that if they held on to that power, that would be like a matriarchy, and a matriarchy is another form of hierarchy which will only lead to resentment and power getting out of hand and becoming corrupted and all the stuff that they know. So they then would retreat and allow the guys to come in and do their stuff, which was nothing by comparison, but it was cool enough, you know. But and it was the play between was the thing. It was the knowledge that power should never solidify. There's no leader with a capital L. You can be a leader for a bit. The guys were in the village with me, and they pointed at one of the men the other side of the village and say, "See that guy over there? He's the best hunter. When we go hunting, he's the dude. He's like, we all know he's the best, he's the bravest. He goes out first with this big wooden stake and sticks it in the elephant. We come in behind it with the spears and stuff. But like, he's the man." But a couple of years ago, he started showing off that he was the man. So of course we couldn't go hunting with him anymore. And the women couldn't cook his food anymore, because we don't do that around here. We're all the same. It's okay to be a leader, but you're not a leader with a capital L. You're a dude that we give you the power for a period of time, and then we'll take it away again. You're not like it. You're just another one of us. And so any form of accumulation or showing off or anything like that, just not allowed. Jerome was there one year, and because this group that he used to visit had contact with some of the Bantu tribes nearby, who were all into hierarchy and the rest of it, like the rest of us. One of the Benjeli was like kind of getting on his high horse about this new leadership thing he'd heard about. So Jerome arrived and he's like, I'm the leader here, and this little kid walked past. He goes, "No, you're not, you're a dick." And, you know, everyone is fully empowered and actually vitally needed to hold power to account. Imagine a world like that. And what you think and what you see in those sorts of spaces is, you think, crumbs, like, we've had a collective experiences like communism and stuff, and it didn't work and people don't like it. Well, that wasn't anarchical. That was like, again, a form of centralized power that got out of hand. This is a very different thing. This is like fully decentralized. Fully decentralized. We have the technology these days that we could do things like that. I mean, it's a long way off. It's a vision, but like, knowing that it's possible is the first step. Knowing that it's our true ancestry, I believe, is the first step. And the vital thing, just to finish once more, is like, I don't know what would come about with our wonderful women folk coming together as a collective and deciding how it is that you want to be. That's something that I don't know what that would look like, but I would be so happy to see that, to know that was happening more and more in our society. It's like the decisions that are being made in the bigger level are coming from a particular way of being, and I think we're really missing another quality, another way of being that. And this is complex stuff to finish my talk on, but like, there was something about that felt really, really important for me to share. And I don't know how that will land and how that will come back to me, but like, I just wanted to end with that. Blessings, everyone. Thank you so much.